Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see so many people in the chambers. We like that. Can we all rise for a moment of personal reflection? I'd like to ask Councillor Gardner to lead us in the singing of the national anthem.
And there are a lot of arts people here, so I'd really like this choir to sound louder than me, please. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all our sons command, car ton bras s'est porté les filles, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Merci au conseiller Gardner and to the choir. Good. We acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Bernadette Clément.
Présente.
Councillors Claude McIntosh.
Présent.
Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Sid Gardner.
Ici.
Deans Hollingsworth.
Present.
Caroline Hebile.
Présent.
Councillors Glenn Grant.
Present.
Todd Bennett.
Present.
Justin Towndale.
Present.
Councillor Maurice Dupel has called in his regrets, Madam Mayor, and Eric Bergeron will join us soon.
Thank you. Any additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda? Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to pull item number 3 from consent correspondence, the third quarter financial results, please.
Any other items?
I have
Madam Clerk?
I have the addition of a bylaw, 2019-142, for the official plan amendment to redesignate land as from urban residential to business district at 780 Sydney Street, and making a confirming bylaw number 143.
Any other items? That's it. So we'll move to adoption of the agenda as amended. Councillor Grant, Councillor Bennett, any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Any disclosure of interest for any of the items on the agenda tonight? Seeing none, I will call for a motion to go into committee of the whole. Councillor Gardner, Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Adoption of the minutes for the meeting of October 28, 2019. Moved by Councillor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Grant. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. So we have a presentation this evening.
We are inviting Mr. John McMartin to sign the Golden Book.
So it is with great happiness and some sadness tonight that we honor John McMartin. So Mr. McMartin, I have come in contact with you so many times over the decades. Anytime there was an artistic project on the go, anything of historical significance, anything to do with the community and the development of this community and the advancement of this community, you have been there. Always present, always supportive, always instructive. And when I heard that you would be moving away from our community, I felt some sadness. And I think it is fitting that tonight, before you leave to join family, that this community honor you by asking you to sign the Book of Recognition, which is signed by citizens who have contributed in all kinds of ways to the betterment of our community. So it is with great pleasure and some sadness that we ask you to sign the book tonight, and also maybe talk to us for a little bit.
You're kidding. You're giving me an opportunity to talk? Oh, dear. Okay. Do I sign it now?
Sign the book first, Mr. McMartin, and then we'll have you speak.
Thank you.
So some councillors may want to make some presentations after you speak, but we'd like to hear from you.
Great.
Great. He came prepared.
If the microphone is a problem, just tell me and we'll adjust it accordingly. Your Worship, members of council, staff, and friends, our friends and family who are here this evening. Thank you so much for the privilege and high honor of signing the city's Book of Recognition. I am deeply humbled and will always remain grateful. Likewise, I wish to thank all those who have labored with me these many years on community initiatives. I signed the book on their behalf, too. I also sign on behalf of my mother, Roberta, who's passed, my father, Alexander, passed, my miracle stepfather, Henry Joseph, and my beloved, Darlene. Page 1. Be it water services at Amherst Corners in 1974, because we got a petition going and got people interested in providing services, the University Committee with Jerry Benson, the Arts Collective with Rose Denway, where we encouraged the city mothers and fathers to buy the Bank of Montreal, the Fundraising Committee for the new Arts and Culture Center under the able leadership of Katie Burke, and we've already raised more than $500,000. Spearheading and driving the creation of a Hall of Fame for the Arts. That's one of my proudest moments. With the able assistance of Councillor Elaine MacDonald. And now there are 29 inductees. The revitalization of Woodlawn Cemetery. The refurbishment of St. John's Presbyterian Church, both interior and exterior, with grants and loans from the heart of the city. Thank you very much. Supporting and promoting the Kinsman Music Festival, Upper Canada Playhouse, Hallsville Theatre, and continue to engage and participate in the annual walk of the Alzheimer's Society and the MS Bikeathon. For all of them, it has been a great privilege to participate and to be part of a team, because that's where you get things done, as part of a team. In closing, I thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors and staff, and those who preceded you for the positive, innovative leadership ever guiding Cornwall and its people toward a bright future. My experiences are shared by many, many volunteers throughout the city. I would encourage others to do the same. If the saying is true, that it takes a village to raise a child, then Cornwall will always remain our village/city. And I thank them too for their upbringing of me and so many opportunities this city has provided over many years. I'm at the end. I'd like to end this my comments, on a very, very personal note. We wear the poppy. Between 1914 and 1917, my father, Alexander, served in 3 major battles of the First World War. Where did he serve? Ypres, Passchendaele, and the Somme. Horrible places, all of them. He did so with great distinction. His efforts were recognized by the brass, and he was awarded a Medal of Honor for bravery. 102 years later, his son, John, after nearly 50 years of volunteerism, thanks to you and the City of Cornwall, he too, tonight, is receiving recognition for his volunteerism in peacetime. Thus, the circle is complete. Father and son, both volunteers. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald, I think you wanted to speak. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, Madam Mayor, but honestly, I would rather have spoken before John than after, because that's a pretty hard act to follow. But I do want to say, echo your remarks, Madam Mayor, that you will be sorely missed, but we do wish you great joy in your move. And I have to say that I thought I knew you, John, because I've worked pretty closely with you since 2013. That was where we had our first meeting of the collective. But then when I read the CV and the agenda, I thought, my God, it's like reading the CV of maybe 3 or 4 people. You had all these parallel lives and activities and volunteer opportunities going on. I don't know where you found the energy and the strength and all that to amass the number of honors that are listed here beside your name. And I think I'd like to tell everybody this one story about John that's really extraordinary. In 2013, this council, the previous council, made a unanimous motion, we passed it, to begin a bank account to start building funds toward an art center. And I'd never met John before, but the next morning around 7:30, because that's when John starts his life and he expects the rest of the world to, phoned me at 7:30, wanted to volunteer to help build this bank account. I'd never met the man. I thought, well, now I ask you, all of you have probably been involved in various activities. When is the last time somebody phoned you at 7:30 in the morning to ask you to help you, you know? I mean, people just don't do this. So, you know, John, you thank Cornwall for giving you opportunities. Well, you create opportunities to serve. And for that, we'll always remember you, and we thank you. We'll miss you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Abad and then Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. John, so sad to see you go, but so glad we have this opportunity to honor you and all of the great work you've done. And I was thinking back as to when we would have met, and I thought at first would have been the Arts Collective, but then I remember back to our time with the University Committee, probably about 7 years ago, where our late friend Jerry Benson walked into my office at the time and invited me to be part of this University Committee. I worked in online education, and I attended my first meeting and walked into this room, and I was a nobody, and there was all these really great, important people around this table, and I believe I sat next to you, John, and you made me feel so welcomed, and like I fit in there, and I was part of this group, and that my voice was important, and I always remember that. And then we, of course, worked a little bit on the Arts Committee together, and you're such a champion for the arts, but you're a champion for our community as a whole. And I remember you used to say there was 3 things you wanted to see accomplished in our community, And the one thing was an art center, which we're getting there. The other thing was a university, I believe, and that dream is still alive. And there was a third thing, and I can't remember what that was, John.
Home for the
A
homeless.
home for the homeless. And I know that that is certainly top of mind in the work that I do, and I know that there's this great new review of our housing plan, and we want to make sure that that is addressed as well. And your heart isn't only with the arts, isn't only with education, isn't only with those who are struggling, it's with the community as a whole. But just to show those three priorities, the diversity of where your heart lies, it's for everyone. And I'm so glad to have been a small part of your story here in Cornwall. So thank you, and we'll miss you greatly.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Gardner?
Well, John, I want to thank you for your leadership. I haven't known you for a long, long time. I have, but to work with you, the leadership that you show everybody, it's like a bacteria. It grows and grows and grows and grows, and everybody jumps on board, and you've been wonderful in terms of your leadership. I think everybody in this room knows that. You will be missed for your energy. I know you've said to me a few times that it's getting a little lower than it used to be, but you'll be missed in this community greatly. And thank you for everything you've done for this community.
So I'll call on Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, Jack? We go back a long way to the Domtar days. On behalf of the city, Don, I've got a plaque here that says, "Congratulations, gratitude are hereby extended by Her Worship the Mayor and members of the City Council to John McMartin for many years of devoted service for the betterment of our community." That's from the city, John. And I was asked as well by our MPP to also give you this in recognition. John Cameron McMartin, I would like to congratulate you on your community service on behalf of the province of Ontario and the residents of Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry. Thank you for serving our community for 45 years. May good health and happiness continue to be yours. Jim McDonnell, MPP.
Whenever people tell us in these chambers, usually young people saying that they're going to leave to go and study or pursue other things, I always tell them that they must come back and that they must carry Cornwall in their hearts. I have no doubt that both of you will be doing that. Can I come down and give you a hug?
Oh, yeah.
I'm next.
We'll do that.
Anybody else?
Yep, I'm letting out.
They're actually going to a gated community this side of Sandia, close enough between both of them.
Yeah, I know the area well. We'll patrol you.
Said you're gonna-
Now, everyone is free to stay. No, pardon?
Another comment?
What's your comment, sir?
You know that Jack just come back from Ottawa,
Yes.
an operation on Monday, very serious, and here he is tonight. Lots of strength, energy, I'll tell you.
Successful surgery. You look wonderful.
Thank you.
You do. You have a lot of people on your side wishing you well, so that's good. People can stay. We love it when the council chambers are full, or you can head out and watch us on TV as well. Your choice. Thank you for attending. Madam Clerk, delegations.
The Great River Network's request for Cornwall's Waterfront Trail to be designated a smoke-free area. And this evening, we have Patricia O'Hara joining us to make the presentation.
Now we got the Presbyterian code there.
Is there going to be a slideshow? Is there
Is there a presentation here? There it is.
Perfect. Welcome, Ms. O'Hara. Who's with you?
Well, this is this is Karen Cooper.
Yes. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much. So good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Patricia O'Hara, and I'm the chair of the Great River Network. And Karen?
I'm also on the Great River Network and am part of the steering committee as well.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present to you this morning, today.
It's my fault.
Let's keep at it.
Good morning.
On our smoke-free waterfront trail proposal. Our mission, the Great River Network, a little bit about us. Our mission is to improve, protect, and value the upper St. Lawrence River for future generations by linking communities and sharing knowledge. Our vision is a sustainable St. Lawrence River ecosystem that is in balance and harmony with all living things. We are international, a network of over 45 river-related organizations, a grassroots organization with no ongoing funding or staff. And we represent over 12,000 river volunteers and sponsors along the St. Lawrence River. These are our roles: communication education, cooperation, coordination, capacity building, and community action. Some projects to date, so you know we're just not talking about water all the time. Oh, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm glad you got the presentation ahead of time. Some of our projects to date, the Great River Cleanup, we've taken 40-plus tons of debris out. The St. Lawrence River Erosion Project, we're working with the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation on shoreline erosion issues. One of the things is voluntary vessel speed reduction areas. Aid to Navigation Batteries Removal Project with the Canadian Coast Guard and Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. St. Lawrence River Fish Habitation Restoration Project with the Cornwall Lunker Club, Raisin Region Conservation Authority, and Seaway Valley Divers. Cornwall Shopping Cart Strategy, keeping shopping carts out of our river. And we proposed the river and shoreline cleanup of Lock 15. We took that up with permission from the City of Cornwall and Akwesasne. We had approached St. Lawrence Seaway because they own that, but then they told us that you lease it. So maybe we can work on a strategy there for 2020. The Aid to Navigation Batteries, that happened actually October 10th, 2019. And we worked with this Coast Guard and Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, and we thought we had 9, but we found 14. And they were disposed of by the Coast Guard. Now we're getting in some rather interesting facts that you've probably had a chance to review. Not a very happy fish down there. Okay. Go over to the next page. Okay. Sorry. And here's some more alarming facts. 2019, Greenpeace Canada had released their list of plastic issues, and these are the top 10 plastic items, not only toxic issues, but the filters on the cigarette butts ended up being #1 item across Canada. This is a slide that summarizes what we've been talking about, and not a very pretty picture. This proposal is already in line with the City of Cornwall bylaw. The city has invested over $80,000 in their developmental plan, and the river and shorelines would be much cleaner and healthier with a substantial reduction in butt waste. The Great River Network supports that if council chooses to designate a waterfront trail as a smoke-free zone, administration recommended that this entire length of the water trail within the city limits, as well as Lamoureux Park, be designated a smoke-free zone. And potentially, it could be 3 types of signs: metal signs installed on the existing signposts, no smoking icons installed along the trail, and we can even stencil some stencils on the paveways and picnic tables. Next. Signage, I believe, does not require a lot of maintenance, and it's cost-effective, and it's a good visual clue for residents and visitors. We found this illustration, and look, it's already got Cornwall on it. Bylaws for trails could be amalgamated into one user-friendly sign. Yeses, pluses, and negatives. In conclusion, we request that the Cornwall Front Trail be designated a smoke-free area. Signage, of course, would have to be a budget item along with the ash urns. And we recommend that you just put them at the entrances to the waterfront trail. And perhaps waterfront trail could be included as a normal course of business for bylaw officers doing their hours of work. It is our inherent responsibility to take care and protect the environment and our great river, and the network's obligation to share you our findings. Great River Network thanks you for your time tonight.
Go ahead.
My coach here.
That's why she's here.
This is not a new idea. There's other trails all across Canada that have their waterfront trails and conservation area trails smoke-free. Brockville has their waterfront trail is smoke-free. Niagara Region Trails, Hamilton Trails, Newmarket Trails, and all of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia trails are all smoke-free. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from council? Councillor Grant and then Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm 100% supportive of this initiative. Being on the River Institute Board of Directors and listening to the work that institute does, it's amazing what they find in the river, and cigarette butts is a major issue with that. And I know we talk about enforcement all the time with this, but I think most people are genuine. Once they learn facts about what cigarettes do to the habitat, fish habitat, et cetera, I think there's enough credibility in that they stop smoking. Now, you're not going to get 100%, but if you don't start somewhere, then you'll never get any kind of buy-in. So I'm 100% behind this, and I think that the majority council will support this initiative. I'm guessing here now, but hopefully Anyway, I think it's great, and, you know, when we have an Adopt a Street program that talks about cigarette butts as well, and they're all over. And maybe we can help educate people and understand the real hazards of cigarette butts and what it does to the environment. So I'm 100% behind you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bennett and then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. I'm also in support of this, and for some of the reasons that Mr. Grant has mentioned. We're both on the River Institute Board, and you can see St. Lawrence College, for instance, has a no smoking policy on their property. Well, go see the properties just on the outside of those boundaries. I get a phone call.
I didn't want to go there.
That's okay, I'll go there. So that little bridge goes over the water, seems to be an ashtray, and the house on the other side, her front lawn seems to be an ashtray, and these are all waterfront trails. So I'm thinking about a visitor coming into town, taking a ride through our trails, and there's just, at certain points, just littered with cigarette butts. So a few people have called me that live along that trail are looking for this kind of thing as well, just because they're tired of having to go outside and pick up the butts off their lawn so their kids can play. And it's even worse in the snow because it stands out like a sore thumb. So I think there are properties along the way that would benefit from this. So I think anywhere where you see people gather for smoke breaks or whatever along our trail, because it's a beautiful spot to go on a break, but I don't think it's a place to be leaving cigarette butts behind. And I think there'll be a lot of happy residents along that waterfront trail that'll be really happy to see this happen. So I will support it.
Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I support the initiative 100% too. You mentioned bylaw possibility of getting them involved toward the end of your presentation, and Councillor Grant referenced it too. I don't think this is going to work strictly because of our bylaw enforcement or our ability to have it policed by bylaw officers. I think just the fact that we prohibit the use of cigarette smoke, practice smoking, whatever, on the waterfront trail, there's so much peer pressure involved in things like this that we don't have to count on catching people who are breaking the rules. Because, I mean, there are scofflaws everywhere, and in spite of the fact that people speed, we still post the speed limits, and we know that we're not going to catch everybody, and that's irrelevant, because it's all about, I think, public education and social standards. This will soon become the norm. It will just be too embarrassing to break the rule. But I also think that in addition to having urns, you said ash urns, I think, at the beginning of the trail, I think it wouldn't hurt, because probably somebody might smoke, I think we should have ash urns in more places than simply at the beginning and the end of the trails. I think we should have them more readily available, just like having garbage cans available, when you're trying to do cleanup. If people don't see a receptacle close by, then obviously they simply discard. And so, anyway, I support what you're doing 100%.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
We talk about the waterfront trail. Explain to me what area that is. Is that the bicycle path?
Just a second. Yeah. Excuse me.
Okay.
For you, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Well, when we first sent a letter to council, putting forth this proposal, administration came back with a recommendation that the complete waterfront trail, and that is from Grace Creek.
Yep, to combustion engineer.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's just the bicycle path itself. Is that counted as the trail, or is it the area around the bicycle?
To me, I believe it's the path.
Path itself?
Yes.
Because it says here the waterfront trail within the city limits as well as Lamoureux Park. Are we including Lamoureux Park as part of the smoke-free zone?
Madam CAO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, when administration brought a report back to council, we recommended that if we're going to include that waterfront trail, then we should include Lamoureux Park.
I couldn't agree with you more.
As well.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I don't think, I use that trail quite a bit. I've never seen anybody cycling or jogging or whatever else smoking a cigarette. So I suspect there's a lot of people walking along the trail that are the
Yes.
source of the problem.
And the problem is, through Adopt a Street and our different cleanup activities that we've done, we do pick up on the street. But once it gets into the water, as a diver, we can't recover them from the water.
Yeah, no, there's no question it's a problem. What's the, does not the litter bylaw cover this? Do we need an extra law?
I think the litter bylaw would cover this, but I think the bylaw, though, is to designate those areas as smoke-free zones.
Smoke-free.
Right.
Okay, so we're including, and I have no problem with this, Lamru Park will be smoke-free, along with the waterfront trail, and any property around the waterfront trail?
If that is the direction from council.
So if I'm walking the trails over there, I'm over there, and I go like this,
Right.
I've broken the law.
Yes.
Okay, no problem with that. It'd be fun trying to enforce it, but common sense sometimes, the rules.
Through you, Madam Mayor, can I comment on the enforcement piece?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to have to read it.
That's okay.
We do not expect Cornwall to increase its bylaw enforcement staff, and we appreciate the workload and the scheduling changes. In our presentation, we said through their hours, maybe that could be part of their area. However, we do feel, just like you gentlemen had said, we do feel that communication and education over time through signage and other aware initiatives, through such things as the city website, the River Network, will achieve the culture change, we said the social standards, as many communities are already doing this.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner, and then Councillor Hollingsworth.
I'm not going to be very long in the tooth here. I was on the council that drove the smoke-free bylaw, and I chaired that committee, and we got it done, so I'm going to support you all the way. And Councillor Grant helped me get through there. I think they wanted to kick me out, but he made sure that we got it done, so he stood behind me. It's great. I want to see it happen. I'll support you all the way.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Just one question, Your Worship, and I'm not sure if it's to admin, to the ladies. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. So if we were to pass this bylaw and someone's having a cigarette on the bike path, they're breaking the law. But if you've ever, like I'm sure most people have done their tour of the bike path, so for example, when you get up towards the hydropower generation, the dam, there's areas where people can kind of move down towards the water to go fishing and stuff like that. So if this bylaw is passed and somebody's having a cigarette while they're fishing down by the water, does that mean that they're also breaking the law?
Madam CEO.
I'm going to direct it to Mr. Boileau.
Okay. Mr. Boileau.
Dog park, like all of those proximities along the bike path?
It really depends on how the bylaw is written up, but I think generally speaking, if council wishes to pass a law that says that you can't smoke in the park, then that is the law. That is what the bylaw would, that's what we would enforce. Now, when we say enforcement, this really reminds me of the regulations that we put in, that are in place, which have a distance from a building. So perhaps 9 meters from a building. And there are, of course, times when people are not complying with that. But I think for the most part, people do comply with that. But it's not like we have enforcement people who go around and ensure that they are complying. I think generally people comply, whether it's because of other people paying attention or themselves, but I think this is really something like that as well. I'll be honest with you, whether it be the police or our enforcement officers, nobody is going to be parading through the park looking for people who are smoking, like the setback from a building. I think it's sort of become a public behavior that you comply with regulations that are identified on signs and regulations that are commonly known. So,
Well, just a subsequent, Your Worship, The thing is, Lamoureux Park stops, I don't know, where the official line is, let's say the bridge, I guess, from the bridge to maybe at the bottom of Adolphus perhaps, or something like that, or I guess further towards the old cotton mills. But like, when the park sort of ends, the canal lands, for example, behind all the old Domtar site and moving along, that's not really Lamoureux Park proper. So are we going to pass a law that anything that touches the water is now technically got to be smoke-free? Is that how we deal with this, or how to, like?
I think it, through you, Madam Mayor, I think it really depends on what council wants to do. You're right about a definition of Lamoureux Park. I've seen a couple of different versions of that.
Like, it doesn't go on forever. It's
No.
not right to Long Sault. It doesn't work like that.
So, for example, generally from the Spillway Bridge to, I've seen,
Civic complex.
to the complex, but I've also seen to Bergeron Drive. So, those are different. Now, council could pass a bylaw that specifies a geography that it wants to apply to. Now, you make the point of the waterfront. Well, if one of the goals is to ensure that people don't put butts into the water, I would suspect that you do want to take a rate to the shore.
Right.
Right.
Okay. I'll wait to see what the recommendation is, Your Worship, before I get into the real bona fide debate. Just trying to figure out how it's going to shake out. Thank you. Thank you again, ladies.
Any further comments? Madam CEO, can you remind us as to where we stand with this report?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Administration brought forward a report a little while ago, and in that report, we had two potential recommendations for council. One of our recommendations was to put, I think, proper containers for cigarette butts or disposal containers along the path to try and prevent the littering and maybe the disposal of them into the water. The other item that we had is that if council wanted to designate the waterfront trail as a smoke-free zone, we had also indicated in that report that it should include Lamoureux Park. So the item is still on our unfinished business listing. Staff will need to bring back a bylaw for council's consideration. If council would like to give staff some direction tonight, we can get that bylaw prepared, or if council would like a report brought back one more time, staff can bring back a report.
So I'd like to entertain a motion to receive the presentation. Councillor Bennett, Councillor Towndale, all in favor? Does council want to give any direction now? Councillor Gardner?
Well, through you, Madam Mayor, I would really like to see Gaynon Park included in this, because we've got a boat launch there. We might be looking at a beach down the road. Let's get it done now. Gaynon Park, the waterfront, smoke-free.
Any other comments? So administration is going to come back with a report, and we'll debate this item in more detail once we have a bylaw in front of us. Councillor Grant?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to make sure that administration has enough information from, because it was rather vague that we just gave you. But I think from the comments that were put forth, I think you have a general idea of what council wants. It's a waterfront trail right down to the waterfront, including Lamoureux Park. Is that good?
And so,
Mr. Boileau?
Yes. Now, as I said, most of the documents that we have in, whether it be official plan or waterfront plan, have Lamoureux Park as generally being from the spillway to Bergeron Drive. Now, what's interesting there is that if we did go all the way to Bergeron Drive, it would include the baseball diamonds, which are predominantly for children, which makes sense. Right? You wouldn't allow smoking at that location. So if council wishes that Lamoureux Park be included, generally our description is the spillway, Bergeron Drive.
Okay. Any follow-up? So I have Councillor McIntosh and Councillor McDonald.
Just briefly, when we talk about the area around the trails. I think you mentioned Brockville, their trail, which is a really nice trail. Maybe we could find out how they work that, and whether a couple other cities, when it comes to geography and proximity of trails.
Councillor McDonald?
Well, I just want to raise an issue because Gato Park was mentioned, and
Yes.
not all of Gato Park is close to the water. So we're retreating, we're progressing from the immediate water proximity to, I think, generalized recreational space. And I'm just wondering if we do have campgrounds established in Gato Park, and if there was, I think that idea was floated, it might happen. To what extent is somebody's tent space their own domicile while they're renting it and living there? Like, we might become so invasive that a camper who might be inland a considerable distance from the water might want to have a cigarette, who knows? And then I think there could be real conflict. So I think we should, we're going to ban cigarette smoking in the city of Cornwall, or are we going to ban smoking along the waterfront? I think we should be a little bit, I was going to say conservative in our legislation here, and I think that's what we should do. We should be careful. Let's not be too invasive. Make haste slowly, and we'll more likely be successful.
Can't have a campfire breaking up.
Mr. Boileau, do you have any response?
Now, it's what the reason why Lamoureux Park was identified as being recommended is for enforcement purposes. In other words, if the trail, so what's unique in Cornwall is that the trail in some communities is really just a singular trail along the waterfront, whereas in Cornwall, it's a multitude of paths through our quite large park. And so it's very difficult to put up signage that provides that information to the public. So that's why the recommendation was to, if we're going to do it in Lamoureux Park, on the edge of Lamoureux Park, it's probably advisable for it to be all of Lamoureux Park. And of course, Lamoureux Park also includes a number of children's playgrounds and splash pad, etc. So it does make some sense. You start to remove the right in so many places that you might as well just remove it in the entire park. In Gato Park, it could be different, I suppose, because if we do put however, there are some play structures in that area, and then there is, of course, the shore. So what we can do is come back with a bylaw with our recommendation, and council can either amend that or approve it.
Councillor McDonald?
If you don't mind, I'll just throw in like the BMX park, for example, like
Right.
the environs there.
Right.
We'd have to consider that.
Correct.
Okay. Any further comments? So I think council has enough direction to come back with a report. In the meantime, I do want to thank Ms. O'Hara and Ms. Cooper for the presentation. I think it is compelling to know what other communities are doing. That is always of great interest, so thank you for bringing that up, and I do hope that our city staff will factor that into the follow-up that will come to council. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. I will take my prop with me.
Yes, please. It looks nasty. Madam Clerk?
Can we take a vote on that motion, Madam Mayor?
Oh, yes. All in favor of receiving the presentation made by Ms. Cooper and Ms. O'Hara, the River Network? Councillor Bennett and Councillor Hébert, all in favor? Carried.
Moving on to the consent portion of our agenda, 780 Sydney rezoning PAC OPA number 1. The action recommended is that council endorse the PAC recommendations as presented, that the Planning Advisory and Hearing Committee recommends to City Council to amend the official plan designation at 780 Sydney Street from urban residential to business district, and amend the zoning bylaw from institutional 10 to commercial 12 based on the September 2019 modified proposal. That findings, recommendations of the various associated studies and reports included be implemented to the satisfaction of the municipality and as part of the site plan control approval process. Second item, housekeeping number 28, with a recommendation that council approve the housekeeping items contained in section E, evaluation of the housekeeping number 28 report. Schedule change to recognize part of 9th Street and part of Lot 7, Concession 1, being parts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 on reference plan RP 52R 1880 as part of North Community Commercial Shopping Center zoning, and correct the zoning from residential 20 to community commercial shopping center. Our third item has been moved to communication. Our next item is the third quarter non-competitive procurement report. With a recommendation that council receive the third quarter non-competitive procurement report for the period ending September 30th, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Bennett, seconded by Councillor Grant. Any debate? All in favor? Carried.
We have two resolutions. The first one is to repeal, is a motion to repeal Section 01-214, Arcades Cornwall zoning bylaw.
There's a mover and a seconder. Councillor Towndale and Councillor Hollingsworth. So debate? Councillor Towndale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know we're on the verge of undertaking a complete review of our zoning bylaw, but I did bring this forward prior to that. If we go back in time to the 90s, I mean, I'm sure the council at the time felt that the decision to restrict locations of arcades from standalone locations was a prudent decision at the time. However, I would argue times have changed drastically since then. Situation has changed, and arcades are making a comeback, quite frankly. There are at least 3 interested parties I'm aware of in the city who are looking to open what would qualify as arcades. One is Scott Gardner, trying to do a video game museum. He's focused on consoles. However, if he has 4 or more, he's defined as an arcade, so he can't do anything. I know there's a young woman who's trying to do something similar, and she has hit the same roadblock as well. A local bar has indicated they're interested in actually moving towards a barcade kind of setup. And if you look at major cities like Ottawa, Toronto, they have places like the House of Targ, which are very popular, and that's the idea. People can play old arcade machines or consoles and whatnot. And now, I'm not sure what will happen should this pass, but it will encourage people, or sorry, it'll give them the opportunity to explore this sort of business area, because realistically there are businesses around us now. I mentioned 3 individuals who are looking to start something in the city, and this bylaw restricts that, you know, and I think it's time to get rid of it. I think it's archaic. I don't think getting rid of it would affect the city negatively. In fact, I think it'd be a positive. And so far, the comments I've received in the public are very supportive, very overwhelmingly. So I'm hoping we can do this tonight. And, I'll save some comments potentially to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you, Your Worship. I tried to figure out how I voted on this about 20-some years ago, but I couldn't track it down. I wanted to make sure I didn't stick my foot in my mouth too deep, but sometimes you got to go there. It seemed to me, trying to remember, there was this notion that, you know, kids are disruptive and the local business owners were opposed to it, or whatever the case may be. But the truth of the matter is, if I voted in favor of it, I made a mistake. And if I voted against it, then I was right, and here I am once again pitching the same product. The bottom line is this, Your Worship. If you look at downtowns, conventional downtown in a medium to smaller size city, they are constantly, the downtown BIAs, period, on a general scale, are always looking for storefronts and businesses that will fit into kind of that core. And while I'm no urban planner, it seems to me, based on what little bit I know, is novelty type stores and businesses that don't fit in that mainstream kind of chain store are kind of a nice sort of fit. An arcade or barcade or whatever you want to pitch at the time seems to me to be the kind of thing that works pretty well in the downtown core, or can work well in the downtown core, because it's not something you might necessarily see in a mall proper. I think of my own experience, certainly Pitton Second, it's a place where my friends 14, 15 years old could get out and see people and hang out a little bit. I don't think it poses any significant risk to the community. If you want to call it good, clean fun, fair enough. But the truth of the matter is, I think that it was probably a bylaw that shouldn't have been implemented, quite honestly. And I think we have an opportunity here to fix it and potentially see a business that will fit kind of in a downtown where it kind of probably should have been all along. So that's why I've supported the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bergeron, and then Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I look at this motion, it's pretty simple for me. I fully support it, but it kind of leads me to a little more of questioning how many other bylaws are there where we're restricting what can be businesses that can be built in our cities. So thank you for making the motion. I'm a little sad I didn't second it. It's fine. I'll get over that. But I'm a year into being a counselor now, and there's no more excuses. So any motions, full stop, that restrict a business from starting in Cornwall, I will be opposed to, and I will be looking thoroughly into this. I'm glad that we're doing a comprehensive zoning bylaw review. I think it's on this agenda later. So I fully, in terms of arcades being in Cornwall, this to me just absolutely is one of those motions, one of those bylaws that needs to be repealed, and is a very simple conversation for this council as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grant and then Councillor McDonald.
Well, it's not quite so simple for me. I think that when we're talking about drugs and et cetera, we should get the chief of police input on this. Perhaps he knows something that we don't, and I won't support this unless we get those comments from the chief of police. It doesn't hurt. Another month's not going to change anything, and we can get that information. So I'm going to put an amendment together that first we get comments from the chief of police before we pass this.
So do you want to add an amendment to the bylaw, Madam Clerk?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that sounds more like a deferral to me, or a referral to the Cornwall Police Service.
A motion to defer is always in order. I did see Mr. Boileau indicate that he might want to speak to your issue. Councillor Grant? Go ahead, Mr. Boileau.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In fact, both of these motions are proposing amendments to the zoning bylaw, which has a process, which requires a zoning amendment that needs to go through the public notice, a hearing, a meeting, an appeal possibility to the Ontario Municipal Board, now the LPAT. But there's a process that needs to be followed for both of these. And so, like our housekeeping amendments, these could both be dealt with in that same manner, but it can't be dealt with simply by repealing this bylaw. You've got to go through a process that is a public process. And so, if council wishes to do that, that can certainly happen, but it has to follow that process.
So then, what is the process here? Because there's a motion on the floor, moved and seconded, so what are you suggesting, Mr. Boileau?
If council wishes to make any of these amendments, we can begin that process through the Planning Advisory Committee and council.
So should this motion tonight be passed? If you're saying it's contrary to...
Well, what cannot happen is that the bylaw be repealed.
But that is the wording of the motion.
Yes, that is correct.
Madam Clerk?
I think, Madam Mayor, if you wanted to amend the main motion to be repealed and remove immediately and start the process, that would be in order.
So I'm looking to Councillor Towndale. Mr. Boileau, would that...
Yes, what you would be suggesting is that administration come back with a process to follow for the amendments of both these items.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Sure, sounds great to me.
Okay. Just making sure process is being followed. Wouldn't want to be criticized for that.
No way, never.
Okay, so then we reword that. It's friendly. Councillor Towndale and Councillor Hollingsworth are in agreement. Any further debate on this? So Councillor McDonald, you're next, and then
Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that the discussion with Mr. Boileau occurred, because I was going to ask if planning would not be involved in something like this. Seems to me these are pretty big changes, Not bad, not good. I'm being totally objective. These are big changes. And for some reason, arcades were banned in Cornwall. And I think there's some suggestion there because of a drug association. I'd love to know a little bit more about the history. I mean, I'd hate to think that just snap of the fingers, well, let's just change that. I'd like to find out why. I mean, maybe it wasn't a profitable business. And I think at one time, there was an arcade in the East Court Mall, in its previous existence as the conventional mall, you know, with the indoors. Access to every store within the mall itself. So I'd like to know how we got here from there. I don't think a simple phrase like drug use is enough to satisfy me, because having made a ban, that's a pretty major step. And I don't think we should just switch like that without doing a lot of research into how we got here.
Okay.
And the way forward. I'm pleased to hear that there are processes in place that through planning and provincial legislation, I guess, there's a way to do this if we're going to do it. So
Mr. Boileau, your report would address the history,
Yeah.
the process would address
and
that.
And the reference to arcade history will be brought in the report. There has been very little history with respect to the height maximum in Cornwall. There's been very little proposals for any exceedance of the height restriction. In fact, I believe there's only one application that was for a mechanical penthouse on the top of McConnell Manor.
So that's the next item, though.
Yes, and so I'm putting those two together only
Okay.
because the process is the same for both.
Councillor McIntosh.
I agree, I underlined immediately, and that's not immediately. A little history on that, the arcade problem existed on Pitt Street, and businesses at the time complained about activities going on at that arcade, and the police commission at the time also recommended that they change the zoning, so they basically closed them up. It was, they had a bit of a bad situation going on there. It wasn't just drugs, there was other things going on.
Any further comments? Councillor Gardner?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, this council talks about policy and procedure. Well, we've got a policy in place that we need to follow before this gets done. I would have voted against it to begin with until I had more information from the police. I think Councillor Grant is right, and more information why that bylaw was put into place in the first place. So, and that's what Councillor McDonald has suggested, and I would have voted against it right away. So.
No, I'm glad Mr. Boileau addressed those issues in terms of process. I will comment, though, on arcades specifically. As you know, I like to have classes come into City Hall to chat about City Council and community engagement and youth engagement. And the last session we had, the CAO was present. We talked about the upcoming agenda and the fact that arcades was on the agenda. And for young people, this is a really relevant issue. They want to have more things to do, more places to gather amongst themselves. And arcades are definitely of interest to that group of kids. They were very excited to know that we were talking about some interesting things on our agenda. So I am definitely going to be supporting going forward with the process. All in favor? Against? Carried. As amended.
Our next motion is the same type of item, and it's a motion to repeal Section 1, 2, 10, maximum height from the Cornwall zoning bylaw, moved by Councillors Towndale and Hollingsworth.
Councillor Towndale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm going to assume we'll have to make the same amendment to this motion, so I'll just mention that.
Thank you.
Again, another bylaw that is designed that targets what kind of developments are allowed in the city. My understanding is, and as mentioned, there are some buildings that are existing in the city that are over 90 meters, or sorry, correction, 90 feet. I keep making that mistake. 90 meters is rather tall. 90 feet. And this bylaw came into effect after, I think, the Seaway building was built. I'm not mistaken, it is over 90 meters. Again, 90 meters, 90 feet, sorry, metric and imperial system.
1982?
Yeah. But to build on that, you know, as Mr. Boileau indicated, you know, there may have only been one application in recent memory to exceed that height, but that doesn't mean that people are looking at the restriction and not wanting to challenge it. I have only spoken to one developer who has built a building that is 90 feet in the city. If he would go higher, he indicated that he would potentially be interested in that. You know, it's not that I'm trying to make this city into a metropolis overnight. I'm not trying to put skyscrapers down everywhere. That's not the intent. But I think we should allow people to build buildings as they see fit, in the sense that as long as the project makes sense, they should have the opportunity to see if they can build something of that would be suitable. You know, we have an opportunity here. A lot of our land has become developable where the old factories were. And right now, there's not a lot of movement. And potentially, if someone were to look at that and say, well, I want to develop there, but what if this restriction, it doesn't make it financially viable? That could be a realistic impediment. Now, I've heard stories that potentially it's the ground that is too soft. There are issues causing that. But I have no concrete proof of that. I mean, I don't know. I look at other buildings. There doesn't seem to be too much of an issue here. But potentially there is, but I would say any developer would have to look at the ground they're about to build on and make that determination for themselves to see if it is suitable or not. So I don't think that'd be a factor. I mean, there is a process, so we'll get more information through that process, obviously, and that should clear up some of these issues. But I'll use Brockville as an example, since everyone likes to compare us to Brockville all the time. It looks out of place, but they have a 20-story condo on their waterfront. But that's a development that was put in that city that we could not have here because we have this rule in place. So I think we're missing out on things like that. Does that mean I want condominiums all along the waterfront just for those residents? The condominiums, no, it does not. But I think that there are opportunities to come forward for development that are being restricted by this. And this is one of those bylaws that actually holds us back. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth, did you want to speak now?
I'd love to.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Quick question, I think, to Mr. Boileau. If you were going to build an economical city, right, you wanted to have your city and try to have as many residents as possible at the least amount of cost, is it safe to say that going up and staying kind of in that downtown core is far more economical than spreading out? Is that am I on track with that, or am I?
Through you, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Absolutely, the infill development is something that we should really be striving for, as opposed to, you know,
Spreading all
urban sprawl.
Right.
However, what's going to be important in our recommendation to council is that the building height be appropriate for the scale of our community. So it's really an urban design architectural exercise to determine the appropriate height for a city like Cornwall. And I'm not suggesting that 90 feet is necessarily that number. That number has been there since, I believe, 1969, and so whether we do it now or we do it whenever we do the comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment, we can give a lot of more consideration to what an appropriate height is for Cornwall. But to answer your question, absolutely, we would prefer that there be more infill development using up existing vacant properties or even properties that need to be redeveloped versus urban sprawl.
Subsequent question, Your Worship, if I might. That number 90 or 100 or 120, whatever, is that a somewhat subjective number? Like if you were to put a piece of artwork on the wall and you were to ask everybody in this room whether, you know, graded as a 10 versus a 1, certainly perhaps someone who's trained with the artistic eye may have one perspective, but I suspect the majority of people in the room would vary in terms of range as to whether they thought it was nice or not. So when we pick 90 or 100 or whatever the number, like, is there some kind of criteria or a textbook that says this is the number? So if you have 45,000 people, it should be 90 feet, and if you have 50,000 people, it should be 100 feet? Or is it just kind of what is it we as a community think we can live with? Like, how do we establish that number?
Again, I think there are a number of factors. I mean, it could also, for example, include comments from the fire protection
Sure.
service, right? Who have equipment in the community and need to fight certain fires. So I think it's really not just a single answer to say the number should be 120 feet.
Right.
I think it's a combination of architecture, it's a combination of engineering, it's a combination of firefighting, it's all of that. It's also, of course, the size of our community. I personally think that a building that is 20 stories high is not suitable for Cornwall, but that's my personal opinion. Because of the scale of the architecture that we currently have. But
Fair enough. A couple of points, Your Worship, I'd like to make. First of all, early in our term, even before the election was called, a couple of groups made reference to the fact that we have a shortage of affordable housing in the city of Cornwall. And while I'm not a builder, it would seem to me that the cost of the foundation really isn't going to change a ton depending on how high you go. And so if you can build more units higher, the cost per unit becomes lower, which means people can potentially buy condos or rent apartments at a lower price. I might be off base on that, but that's the logic I'm working with. The other thing, Your Worship, is that we have a number of seniors in the community, and my mom is a senior, and certainly, and my parents, the one thing that they often articulated is the desire to be close to, stores and the drugstore, the doctor's office, whatever they needed in terms of services. So if we allow at least even just a couple of stories higher, you can potentially build residences that may be suitable to seniors in closer proximity to places that they need to go, making it much more convenient for them. The other thing, Your Worship, is I'm certainly not going to try to speculate on the condition of the soil in the city of Cornwall. I think that's really contingent upon a builder determining whether pile driving is suitable or how they want to attack it. But that's not something that I would think that any contractor who's going to build is going to determine whether the soil is suitable for 20 stories or 5 stories, whatever the number may be. I'm anxious to see the report. I think that going higher, while it may not need to be 20 stories, but certainly 5 or 6 stories seems to kind of limit the options and opportunities for potential builders to recoup the most amount of money they can for the best price for people who are vending. So I'm going to support the motion as it's written. I look forward to the report. While that may change my mind, at least right now, I think that's something we need to explore. Thank you, if you would.
I have Councillors Bergeron, McIntosh, and Gardner. Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This one again is pretty, I suppose the word would be confusing, why we would have a maximum height in Cornwall. I appreciate I wasn't around in the late 60s when this was developed, but these are the types of bylaws that I think need to be relooked at. So my only question that I have to this council tonight is to the fire chief is, I think we have buildings already over 90 feet in the city, correct me if I'm wrong. Does that affect your ability to save people in a building more than 90 feet?
So thank you for the question, through Madam Mayor. So the 90 feet, I mean, commonly was used as a limitation to aerial firefighting devices. So often you'll see that 90 feet based on that. However, I will say this, the advancement of codes and modern building technology now, I don't think, aerial devices aren't the only way to fight fires today. I don't think fire department capabilities should limit progress on the height of buildings. I think that's less of a worry today, and we see it in cities all over the world.
Thank you. Exactly the answer I was hoping for. We're not limiting buildings because of safety. And so, to me, this motion therefore becomes very simple. I support the motion that we repeal this, appreciating that there is a comprehensive zoning bylaw review coming in the next months, I suppose it would come back, but this one to me is, again, a relatively simple discussion. Thank you.
So we're discussing an amended motion, right?
Yep.
We've taken away the repealed immediately and same as the last motion. Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Gardner.
I want to thank Dean Hollingsworth for his concern about seniors and housing. I'm at that point, Gene.
I have senior parents.
Anyway,
That's okay.
through you, Madam.
Yes.
Mark, you said there's not much demand, developers aren't coming to you saying, you know, your restrictions are too much. I'd build a 20-story building if you didn't have the restrictions. You're not getting that?
Mr. Boileau.
No, in all of the years that I've worked, whether it be in planning or development, I've never seen this to be an issue. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't revisit an appropriate number. As I said, there's one application that was made for an exceedance of 4 feet on the 90 feet.
Okay. When it comes to building, multi-story buildings, there's certain areas you can build in? Or is it,
So the city generally has a 90-foot maximum,
Yeah.
unless the zoning of the applicable property limits it.
Yeah.
And so that does occur in some situations. There is also something in our zoning bylaw called angular planes, which really means that in the downtown, you have to be sympathetic to the adjacent property, so it restricts height as well as the 90 feet.
beautiful piece of property at the end of Power Dam on Second. Could somebody build a 15-story condo there?
Well, 90 feet generally limits you to 10 stories.
Yeah, but if we had,
Oh, if you, well, I should clarify something too. The bylaw doesn't have to generally be amended. A minor variance application can be made like what occurred at McConnell Manor to exceed any bylaw.
yeah, I'm just thinking about the Seaway properties that are going to be coming up for sale, and, you know, developers are into the condo business.
Right.
That's ideal real estate for that kind of development. So-
If the zoning does not restrict it
Yep.
further than the general provision, then
Would neighbors have a say in this? Say, you know, they say, gee, I don't want the guy in a 15-story having a good view of my backyard? No?
well, if it's generally approved,
Yeah,
then he would not, or
Okay.
he, she would not.
okay. My concern, too, was the fire chief answered the question. I also thought maybe it was a deal where, you know, the ladder area only reached so high, but he says that's not the issue.
Well, I think it may have been applicable in the 60s.
Yeah, yeah.
It may be less applicable today.
Okay, that was my concern.
Right.
Councillor Gardner, you know you're okay?
It was the fire department, so no, I'm fine,
Done?
thank you.
So I'll go to Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm going to ask a question that I don't know who in the world could answer it, because, I mean, word on the street is that that Tall Ships Landing in Brockville is, not 100% occupancy. That's an understatement on my part. And then the Toronto Star on Sunday had an article about the huge condos at, you know, Yonge and Front in Toronto, and there was a vacancy rate between 13 and 56% in some of those big buildings. Now, you never get a developer or a landlord or a building owner to tell you that. So somebody did months of research watching the lighting patterns in these huge buildings to determine which places never had a light go on. And, I mean, it's difficult to know. Like, for example, our own Seaway building, it's a pretty high building. How much of it is occupied? I've heard it's not anywhere near 100%. So I throw that out there because, I mean, this is a consideration, but I don't think you'd get a businessman anyway wanting to build a building beyond expectations of rentability, you know? So I don't know how we go there, but it's an important factor.
Thank you. Any further comments on this? You want to close, Councillor
If
Towner?
no one else has any further comments.
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to close up, I'd like to thank my colleagues for their comments. Obviously, there's a process that'll be initiated here, so there's going to be a lot of opportunity to find out more information, get some input from the public and our city departments as well on their opinions. Listen, at the end of the day, it is up to developers to decide what they want to build and whatever happens with that. I mean, I think every development is a risk, and that's something developers kind of tangle with before they decide to put a shovel in the ground. So, I think we need to create the environment that is available for them to attempt to develop in. Councillor McDonald, to your point, I actually work with the operation manager at the COA building. He tells me it's full. I work with him at the STNG Highlanders, and he tells me he has no space. So I'll take his word on that. But, I mean, that's one example, and your point is well taken. There can be high vacancy rates, but that's something a developer has to factor in before they build. So, I mean, if we give them permission to do so and they can't sell units or they can't rent them out, well, that's not our responsibility, in my opinion. So, I mean, that's up to them to figure out if it's a viable project or not. But, maybe the magic number isn't anything extraordinary. Maybe there's still a magic number, but I think it is more than 90 feet. Maybe it's 120 feet, as Mr. Bolo mentioned, but something like that. Either way, I think we need to look at this, and I know we're undertaking this review coming soon, but I'd really like to look at these quicker, just get them done, or in this case, we'll see how it turns out once we have the information back here. So, thank you.
Thank you. I would hope that part of the process, Mr. Boileau, is going to include giving us some context, some historical context around that, because I was interested to hear the fire chief say, well, that 90 feet is something that is historically linked to firefighting equipment. So context around why we are where we are would be interesting in this process. All in favor? Against? Carried. Madam Clerk.
Moving on to unfinished business reports. Our first one is the RFP Terms of Reference Council Review, with a recommendation that administration provide a report to council for input and approval for the terms of reference of an RFP prior to the issuance of the RFP document, where the following criteria is met. A, the contract is estimated at over $150,000 when sent, and B, a change of level of service is being considered.
Moved by Councillor Bennett, seconded by Councillor Ibaya. Debate. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This bylaw is something I've been looking forward to since I started my term here. It always seemed to frustrate me long before I was a councillor, and I would sit over there and I'd watch things come up that were RFPs that being presented to vote on, and why they were voting on them, I have no idea, because it was a done deal. So I can remember drug contracts going to an out-of-town place, and everybody was freaking out because it wasn't a local contractor, and there was absolutely no say at that point. It's too late. So while this won't fix the local contractor thing, but it's just that if an RFP of a certain value or a change of service to our residents was to come to us before it goes out, then we have an opportunity to put our 2 cents in there. So when it finally does come back to us, we shouldn't have any complaints because we already had our 2 cents on it, whereas before, we really didn't. It just showed up, and if we didn't vote for it, well, we're going to find ourselves in court, and it's too late to have an opinion. So I think if we're this way here, I'm really happy with the way it reads. It gives council an opportunity to make a recommendation. How do we like to see an RFP turn out? Or maybe we have questions that would make the RFP slightly different, but it's going to be done at the proper time. And it's only, according to this, there's an estimate of just a handful a year that would come to council. So I have no issue with that. I don't think anybody would have an issue with having to see 4 or 5 RFPs a year to get our input on, but it sure beats getting it put in front of us without us having any say in it whatsoever and having to vote for it because we have to. So I'm really happy to see these changes, and I hope the rest of you see it the same way. Thanks.
Any further comment? Councillor Bergeron.
Yes, thank you. I echo my colleagues' comments here. I think for the last year, I've been kind of commenting on the RFP process, and this is exactly what I wanted to see. So I'm glad it comes back to us. I understand where we have to not be involved. That's really clear, and that is the law in this province. But I always felt that, we were only getting it at the end. And so this kind of clarifies that a little bit. That makes it, I think, a little bit more accountable to us, which was ultimately what we were looking for, I hope. So I fully support this, and I welcome these changes. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Gardner.
I'll support this, but I have an issue with trusting our administration. they come forward with plans, recommendations, and I do not want to be put in a situation as a counselor where I don't trust the people that know more than all of us together, have gone to school to learn to do what they're doing, engineers, whatever the heck they are. They're the professionals, and although I agree with this, I have difficulty with people not trusting our administration, so that's my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Just one comment, Your Worship. I don't think this is necessarily a case of trust so much as a case of council determining what level of service they want. If you take a look at the recycling RFP, there were a number of provisions in that RFP that were kind of pre-established. Good or bad, you can debate either way, but if we're going to approve a tender or an RFP worth 25 million bucks, I think that I, at least, would like to know at the outset what it is we're kind of RFPing or tendering ahead of time. It's not about trust so much as about having the foggiest idea of what I'm talking about and what I'm voting for before we get to the place where, okay, now you have to vote. That's all, at least speaking for myself, that's all I'm looking for, is a chance to see what it is we're actually putting out to tender, so that if somebody corners me on the corner of Sydney Street and 4th and says, hey, you guys, look what you're doing, I'll have a decent idea of what I'm talking about and can justify whatever it is we're doing. And I suspect most of us would feel the same way. So I'm going to support it the way it is. Thank you.
Any other comments? I am very pleased to see this report as well. There is a real, and to Councillor Gardner's point, there is a real delicate balance between administration and politicians. So we rely on the expertise of our administration, but our role is to bring in the community piece. We bring community expertise, and sometimes it's difficult to find a balance between those two. But on these issues, where we heard from our lawyer telling us, yeah, you're kind of stuck with some of these rules, it does make sense, though, for administration to come back and allow council to have a conversation with administration about, especially to me, the change in level of service, which we know is going to affect our community as we know it. And so it's relevant for council to be in conversation, active conversation with administration. So I appreciate this report. I will also be supporting it, and I thank Councillor Bennett for being patient. I remember you bringing this up way back at the beginning of the term, and so I'm glad that we're here today with this. All in favor? Against? Carried. Thank you.
Our next item is the water meters, conservation and sustainability options for citywide implementation of water meters, with a recommendation that A, council receive this report, B, that council direct administration to develop a water conservation and servicing master plan and fund the plan from the Water Works Reserve, and C, that the water conservation and servicing master plan be presented to council for consideration at a subsequent meeting.
Someone prepared to move? Councillor Hollingsworth, seconded by Councillor Grant. So I'm wondering, Madam CAO, whether you'd want to have staff give a high-level presentation of this, and then we can take questions and have some debate.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I'm going to ask Mr. Carl Goodwin to maybe introduce the report at a high level. There has been a fair amount of work put together in the report. We did do some public engagement, but I think with some of the information that we had put out, I think that you'll see from the survey comments, many of those comments are negative when we start to talk about costs. So part of what we're proposing in this report is to undertake other initiatives to look at other ways to potentially fund an initiative such as this, also recognizing that there could be savings and some costs down the road by conserving water. So with that, I think I'm going to ask Mr. Goodwin to speak a little bit to the report.
Mr. Goodwin.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you. So the report tries to sort of talk about some of the global components of what we do in water. The important things that we try to remember, I do anyways, is that if we can measure things, we can have confidence in what we're doing. So I feel that one of the advantages of moving to a water meter implementation throughout the city is to be able to do that. In the report, also, we had the opportunity to do a little bit of a survey out to the public. I personally feel that gave us an opportunity to see where the knowledge level might be of some of our residents. When I looked at what other communities have done when they move to water meter programs, they've always said that they need to start with community outreach. So that survey allows us to give us a little bit of that information. And if council were to direct us to move forward, what you would have noticed in the report that we would start with community outreach. And in my mind, I would envision community outreach would be to go out, sit with our residents with some tea and listen and ask what that is. The reason I say that is our team is very proud that what our residents, which is similar to residents throughout Canada, all they have to do is turn on the water and get great water, and then it comes out. So the other element that I think is important for us to sort of understand if we want to go forward is that there's an advantage of going forward now with some of the latest technology. Some of the latest technology allows us to wirelessly transmit information to a central location. That could be a website. It can push notifications to people. So one of the examples I thought about was if you leave your toilet running overnight and you've never seen water usage overnight, in the morning you could see a text message that would say, go check your toilets, for example, and you could save yourself some water. With that also then gives that information to our maintenance team. So our maintenance team, and it's a little bit more of a complicated math, but our maintenance team would be able to look at the water through the city, and using that sort of similar example of and taking, if there's water use sometime when there isn't normally water use, and we can use some GIS location to kind of say, you can go out and find some of that, some of those waters and some of those leaks, and we can take care of those leaks without infrastructure damage if it became a really big leak and we got a sinkhole or something like that. The other elements that I wrote down as a bit of an example that that I think is important for us when we think water meters, conservation, and the whole environment is that the concept that it took me a long time to understand this, but I look at it this way. So we start with river water, and the moment it enters our intake, we change it into drinking water. So we're changing the water into drinking water. Then we use the water, we turn it into wastewater. Then we bring it to our wastewater treatment plant, and we change it into effluent and put it back in the river. So we're not putting river water back in the river. So the more we can conserve that, the more we keep the ecosystem or the river the same. We're not impacting that. And the other concept that's sort of big picture, which I think is really important for conservation, is that our roads and our buildings, rainwater goes onto roads, goes into and changes into stormwater and goes into the river. The ecosystem says that should be groundwater that goes in. So as we conserve those things as well, that sort of helps us go forward. And the other thing that I tried to talk about in the report was that when I've tried to find any community, phone the communities, even Canada or the major communities that have water meters, it's close to 100% of the time that there are been operational savings and capital investment savings where the water meters have sort of paid for themselves with water meters and been able to promote ease of infrastructure life cycle, some of those big things. Is that enough of
Spectacular.
Thanks. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I'll go to council. Councillor Bennett, Grant, and then Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've heard comments, of course, when we look online, when we put out this on our own Facebook pages, whatever, there's lots of comments. So one I heard was that these meters have 10 to 20 year life cycles. So are we going to be on a continuous $77 a year for the rest of our lives to pay for water meters because we're paying $77 over 10 years and now we're done, now we have to replace the meters, so here we go again? What's the life cycle typically on these meters?
Through you, Madam Mayor, a fairly complicated answer. So the water meters themselves typically are 20 years plus. So we are measuring their, until they don't give us the right volume anymore, they can keep going. Some of the components that have been changing are the part that we wouldn't have to worry about for a while, which is the technology to get the information. So the advantage we have right now is that sort of electronic technology. And that part itself now is much smaller. I think it's about this size, sorry for. It is relatively inexpensive now. So typically what we're seeing is that's the part that wears out, and it's around, it can be around the 10 to 12 years, that electronic part. Most communities right now, when you might have seen in, if you do some online searching of some comparable water meter programs, it's they're changing out to this new technology that would be available to us if we went forward. So from what I have gotten from some of the manufacturers, we're talking about 20 years for the actual meter, 10 years for the maintenance, the maintenance part, and I believe that's, depending on the volume, it is under $100.
Okay, thank you. The other thing you hear about is the bills start to go up, our rates start to go up when the consumption comes down to offset the loss of revenue, because we still have to operate a plant. So I heard you say in your lead up to this that you're expecting the costs to maintain the plant to drop. So infrastructure will last longer, that kind of thing. So the narrative out there that yeah, our consumption is going to go down, our bills should go down, but actually they're going to raise our rates up because we still have to pay for the plant. But from what I gathered from what you said earlier, that's not necessarily the case.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Another advantage of the Cornwall situation is that, and we made the suggestion in the report, we would be able to talk about what a hybrid model is. So the advantage to us right now is we can use all the information to pick the volume rate. We would expect a couple of people, one person's might go up because they use a little bit more and go down, but the average would be the same. And then what's happened in previous places where they did their financial planning based on a really high volume based, and then they would have a dry year and a big change in consumption. So the advantage that we have is that we'd be sort of starting here, and we'd be going down, and the economic folks that have a lot of experience with that, and there's a lot of data out there, that we would be predicting that the rates would follow this, or as the consumption went down, the amount of revenue that we would need would be the same. So we would have that advantage for us as a whole. Our expectation would be that the actual amount of money that we would need to bring in would be the financial model that we kind of have. We might have to update it a little bit for the consumption, but the actual just gross financial plan that we have would stay the same.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It does. So just to follow up, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So what you're saying then is that my consumption goes down at my house, but the cost to run I just want to make this as simple as possible. So at my house, there are 2 people, my consumption goes down, hey, this is great, but the cost to run that plant's the same, so that money has to come from somewhere, so the rate would change for me. Is that accurate?
So what we would expect, and this has happened with other communities that have done this, is that right now we know from the financial plan how much money that needs to come in to maintain the financial plan. So we would build a rate model with consumption that would get to that same number. And so it's, a little bit but that's basically, and then what would happen is, maybe an example of, if I was paying, if 2 people were paying $100, then one person might pay $50 after this and the other person $150, but we still end up with the $200.
Right.
So that's part of what the hard work, if we were asked to go forward, that we'd have to do, and that would be making sure that we always get the $200, where we have the rates that get to the $200 with the 2 different consumption rates. Does that?
That does answer. Thank you. Just one comment, and my wife, who clearly is a lot smarter than I am, because I was all excited about this, and my rate's going to go down, and she said, yeah, but your rates are going to go down on the backs of a young family that maybe can't afford the extra. So there's a young family making modest salaries, they have 2, 3 kids, they're doing baths every night, doing all that laundry, and they're going to be footing a bill so that mine is lower. And so I guess that becomes an affordability thing. I'm not sure how we address that, but that should be a concern. So I don't know if there's, in these models in other cities, how that's handled, but I would think a family that's struggling to get by, that's got to be a concern if they've got, all these baths and laundry to do and everything else. So that's a bit of a concern, but also, everybody seems to think it was said earlier in the lunchroom, I can't remember who said it, that everybody seems to think our water bill is $800 a year, but it's actually not. I think it was you, Councilor McIntosh. And it was a great point, because it's not. Our water bill is actually 2, and so there's water and sewer, right, and they're separate. So I would suggest, or put forward the idea, that maybe when those bills come out, they're separated. So that people say they're actually paying $300 for water, not $800, and that their sewer is costing them $400 or $500, because that's a difference. And I think if we're telling people your rates are going to go up, we want to make sure it's based on the right number. So your actual water rate in my house might be $300 for whatever it is right now. So that rate's going to go up a little bit, not the 800. So everybody keeps throwing around the $800 number. I don't think that's the right number to use, because it is separate. I don't know if that's possible to separate those on the bill so people understand that a little bit better. Because until Councilor McIntosh mentioned it, I had not given it a thought. My mind was the $800. So just a suggestion. Thanks.
Madam CEO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think I'd refer that to Mrs. Bailey.
Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. On our water bill, it's actually our water charge plus a calculation for wastewater. We are putting in a new accounting system right now. We can take a look to see if we can separate that. I'm not sure that we can or not, but we can look into it.
Great.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On page 189, I don't know if you have that in your tablet or not, page 189. They talk about risk, and it says potentially millions of dollars in future capital expenditures directed toward the water and wastewater infrastructure will need to be invested by the customer base in order to meet future water demand. Do you know something that we don't know? Future water demands, is that in millions of dollars? Through you,
Thank you, Madam
Go ahead.
Mayor. So, That's an excellent question. So partially that's trying to inform council. This has been the experience in other communities that they've been able to lower capital infrastructure and not have to expand plants or expand pumping stations or turn on more pumps or you purchase more pumps. The one example might be at the water treatment plant right now. We just put in a new high lift pump you may or may not be aware of that is servicing all our needs and has eliminated the older pumps. The impellers have been wearing out prematurely. If we were able to have a great conservation program, we may not have to buy another pump. The other element that happens is that water consumption at the water purification plant plus some stormwater drives the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. And our wastewater treatment plant has about twice as much operating expenses, so that would bring those down. We also are using the wastewater treatment plant to pump some of the water away from the CSO that we have at Brookdale and those other things. And the wastewater treatment plant has, during rain events, runs at greater than 85% capacity. Greater than 85% capacity is something that we should try and minimize according to the MECP. So that's been noticed on our annual inspection reports. So we are right now trying to look at whether we can re-rate that officially. If we can't re-rate that officially, we would have to at some point in time consider that expansion. And then the other things that I talked about in the report, I think you're rightly, I don't know those things. The conservation programs have typically helped water treatment plants say we're open for business without those things going on. And water treatment plants, and sometimes it's hard for, I know for me, is that these are 100 and 150 year sort of investments, so we don't know what's coming on in the future. So that's the comment is really trying to summarize a tiny bit. If I go off, sorry, if I went off top of it, summarize what every other city has seen, that they've seen really significant capital savings.
So you're making an assumption that our city is going to grow to 50,000 in a short period of time.
So
it is.
Optimist.
What I really want to make everybody aware of is those are the potential savings that you could do and that sort of potential risk. How high or low the risk, I haven't tried to chat about in the report. It was partially the reason I called it a discussion paper, is that I think it's important for us all to be aware of if we can conserve, and water meters is one of the known methods that has been effective, that we can limit operating and capital expenses into the future. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Page 194. This is a draft discussion paper. Who authored this report?
So I was the author of the report, and it was edited by the senior team.
It was which?
Edited by the senior team.
Okay. Well, it's probably one of the best reports I've read. Very clear to reading, and it helped me a lot to understand. If you look over in their, when we're, part of our motion is to put together the the Water Conservation and Service Master Plan. Now, is that going to be outsourced, or is that internal?
Through you, Madam Mayor, what we would like to recommend is that the administration sort of leads that, and then we look for expertise in the areas that we would want to have some help with.
Oh, it's a combination of both, you're saying? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth, and Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions. When we, Mr. Goodwin, if I might, looks like you're on the hot seat tonight. When we pull water from the river, our pH is what, about, like, right out of the river, about what, eight on the pH scale, give or take?
It's a high 7.
High 7? And when I'm going to crack it open at the tap, it's probably not right bang on at 7, right? It would probably be, what, 6.5, 7.5?
We're low 8s.
Sorry?
Low 8s.
And we do that on purpose? We keep that acidic level a little bit higher, is that the point?
Oh, sorry. Through you, Madam Mayor. That point is the treatment methods that were chosen to design the plant results in that pH. Now, that's actually a good thing. pH on a little bit on the high side helps make sure metals don't go into the water. So,
Right.
I don't know whether somebody chose that on purpose, but it was smart.
Randomly chose it. And we're pumping it back into the river after we've treated our raw. What level would we be at that point?
So, sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, I think we're mid, I think 7.4 or 7.5.
So we're pumping it right back in at about the same level, give or take, that we pull it in the first place?
So, and that's a control, sorry, it's a control number with our C of A.
Okay. All right, thank you. A couple of things, Your Worship, on a technical side, or a less technical side, is that water meters are, people get excited anytime you propose change, and certainly I think we would all admit that we're looking at a fairly significant change in the way we conduct our potential water business. I think a few points that I want to make. Every time we talk about water meters, people say, well, you know, technically speaking, if we go to water meters, then a family of 5 will, you know, have to pay a higher rate than the family of 2, and that's kind of unfair. And there's some validity to that, to be sure. But the other side of it is this. If you have a family of 5, young family, with 2 taps in their house, and they run their water indiscriminately, versus a family of 5 who have 7 taps in their house and barely use any water at all, the 7-tap family is in essence subsidizing the 2-tap family, even though they use far less water. That's how our system is set up. So if you have a bunch of taps in your house, regardless of how much water you're using, you pay a higher price. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. The other thing is this. While the other thing is we talk about the environment, using fresh water is sort of not, wasting fresh water is sort of not a good thing. And if people don't see what they're using, I think they're less inclined to concern themselves about it. And once they start seeing their bill, fair enough. And finally, certainly I think we all admit water is an essential service and we need it. Our survival depends upon it. But so in January is heat, and yet we pay for what we use in heat. There's no kind of subsidized method. I think we would say heat, any other, for those people who commute back and forth, they pay for their gas, it doesn't get subsidized. And so really, while I'm interested to see what the Grand report will reveal, I think the fact that by going to a water meter-based system, it is more equitable and that people can at least gauge how much they use, which to a certain degree is going to affect their rate. And in terms of subsidizing or who's paying more and who's paying less, well, our system currently isn't really that fair. So it's not as though it's going to be any, like, it's not like, well, this system is way better for young families, because in reality, it's not really that case at all. So I think we need to see this through. I think we need to at least see what the master plan will reveal, which is why I'll support the recommendations as they are presented.
Thank you. Councillor Towndale and then Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is obviously a very complicated issue. It's very in-depth. Thank you for the report, Mr. Goodwin. It is actually a very well-written report, and I found it very enlightening. I know councils in the past have looked at water meters. In fact, I found previous motions from previous councils endorsing the idea, but unfortunately no further action was taken at that time. So I think this is the furthest we've got so far. But, right now, tonight, we're not deciding that immediately tonight. We're deciding on a plan of action, which I think is important because it gives us a better idea of what this would look like, because an undertaking of this size is obviously quite massive. We're talking about a huge project, lots of money, lots of time, lots of effort, lots of coordination, et cetera, so forth. The plan is the first step forward. I think at that time we'll have the true discussion on what is best. We received a lot of responses on the online survey. I think it is unfortunate that the wrong value was assigned to the meters. We learn now it's $77 per household, not $95. That is unfortunate, but I think also, as we proceed down this path, public consultation is going to be part of it, and open houses are going to be part of it, and I think that's important because reading a lot of the comments, people right now are under the impression they don't pay for water, which I found interesting. I heard that a lot. I saw that a lot, and that's not true because it's built into, it is a charge, but if you rent, it might be built into your rent or you just don't see it. If you're a homeowner, you get the bill, you can see it. So that's something that needs to be clarified because people think this is a new fee for a service. That's just not the case. So education is obviously an important component of this, but I think also we really need to take a look at what this would look like. The report, again, very well written, starts to get into the hard facts of saving money on infrastructure, on operational costs, and that's a very compelling reason to do this, to look at meters. And unfortunately, I don't think that's been communicated well so far. So that's something that we need to look at going forward. But again, this is the beginning of a process here. We're not deciding on water meters tonight specifically, but we're deciding to get the plan going. Like everything else we do, got to have a plan. I look forward to that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor McDonald.
I too have a problem with the water bill comes out. I don't know how many people have told me my water bill's $1,000. I say, no, it's not. And they say, well, bring me my bill. And I point out to them, no, the water's here, the sewer. My bill's $832. $547 of that is for sewer. And so there's a misconception over there about that. Are we not in the business of selling water? I remember one time an industry closed here, and we were told the residents had to pick up the difference because less revenue was coming in. But we're really in the business of selling water, aren't we? To pay for the system.
Mr. Goodwin?
Through you, Mayor. Our sort of requirement is to have a long-term plan to ensure that the infrastructure provides safe drinking water all the time. So you're correct that we have to have a method legally that we take in enough money to maintain the long-term infrastructure and always be looking at that sort of those risks.
So I think it was Councillor Bennett brought up the fact that if this drops here, somebody else has to pick up the difference. If my bill comes down $100, and Joe Blow's bill comes down $100, somebody else's bill's got to go up to balance the books.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is basically correct in theory. If you don't mind, what I was taught was that we should always be trying to look for projects that can kind of do both at the same time. So if we're seeing that there is, consumption sort of going down, or we would try to find projects where there's some built-in cost savings.
Some communities aren't doing that because Ottawa, Brockville, Belleville, Brantford all had to increase their rates because consumption dropped. Are they not doing, doing something they shouldn't be doing, or?
So the difficulty that happens, and I'm fairly confident that we won't, if you ask us to do what we're suggesting, is that if you overbalance sort of the consumption and penalty, that what can happen is the example in Ottawa was that they had a really wet summer, climate change, wet summer, and there was a requirement to try and redo their financial plan. The difficulty for us to be able to really answer that question is we don't know what their long-term financial plan was, and if in some of the long-term financial plan things that we do is we're trying to have reserves and rate structures so that if that happened, we fundamentally, that would just come out of the reserves, and so you don't have to do that. But it would be, I think you're hitting on a really important thing that you want to ask questions if we go forward with what is that sort of model, the financial model that goes out, so that we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah,
So I think those would be the really good questions that when that financial part comes out, that we ask. That's important questions.
Landlords currently pay the water bills, I believe. Tenants don't. No, that's a fact.
Madam CEO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think there's a mixture of both.
Yeah, but I think most tenants don't pay the water bill. So if I'm renting to a family of 6 and I'm the landlord and the bill goes up, the rent's going to go up, and I'll take it to the tribunal and win my case. So I think there's, as Councillor Bennett, there has to be some concern with that. You know, it's not maybe a big issue, but there is an issue, I feel. Families would be penalized. I know Dean said something differently, but I think, you know, we got 3 teenagers in the house. You're going to be taking showers quite a bit.
2 hours.
You can do all the things you want, and you know, for conservation, you're still going to use a lot more water.
Madam Mayor, that's exactly the important questions that we would need to ask the people that are developing those rate models, and then we would want to provide to you. Because you're correct, we also are understanding that drinking water is, you know, very, very important for life. And there are, without giving a lot of details, there are a lot of communities that have looked at different models to be able to do that. So council also would have an opportunity to sort of chat about that affordability element and how that affordability element goes forward.
What's going to cost to install meters? 8 million, 9 million?
We have some ballpark numbers that we got from our current provider. So it's maybe in around the $600 per meter.
So I'm wondering what the city, I'm not concerned about it per meter, but what's the total bill? You must have some idea.
It's about...
If we were to install them tomorrow, what are we, 14,000 households?
So it's approximately $11 million.
11 million? And we have 11 million in the bank?
Actually, we do.
We have to borrow the money, don't we?
Through you, Madam Mayor,
Go
I
ahead.
think part of what we'd want to do going through this exercise is try to take a look at different opportunities to fund it. Some of the items that we've recommended or we've talked about in the report, similar to how we funded some of the changes at our wastewater treatment plant. Once you build in a certain amount, that could fund it on an ongoing basis. We also think that there's the potential that if we're producing less water, there's going to be less operating costs at the plant. And then there might also need to be a bit of a financing component as well. So I think we don't have enough, we haven't had enough time and information to look
This is
into
all
that.
gonna come out later.
But I think similar
We're
to
definitely
our,
gonna have to borrow millions of dollars to.
we'll borrow, but then we might be able to pay that borrowing back via some of our savings and operational
Yeah,
costs,
okay.
like we did with our LED lights.
Saying, it's gonna be, I thought I saw a figure that over 10 years, you'd pay an extra $70 a year or something, $77. So your water bill's not dropping, it's gonna go, at the very best, stay the same because you're paying for your water meter for the next 10 years.
Right, so that is not
So-
taken in any consideration for any type of savings in operating costs or foregone capital expenditures that we haven't had to put into down the road.
Yeah, and we're selling water to the townships, aren't we?
We have some water to some neighborhoods.
And I believe somebody else wants to buy our water, and I thought previous councils were quite willing to say, hey, let's sell them our water. Maxville was mentioned one time, I know that deal's off the table.
Right.
So we're trying to conserve, but we want to sell the, I don't see where that comes into conservation thing. Now we're going to sell water to the neighbors, and we're trying to conserve water. It just doesn't jive with me.
Well, everybody would pay based on the same fee
Yeah,
structure, right?
It's going to,
Water is required.
I know,
through
but the
you, Madam-
operation of your plant, you say consumption drops, you save on operation, but if we're selling it, we're increasing our
Madam CAO?
Through
Maybe
you-
getting off topic.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would make sure that through that rate structure, everybody pays
Yeah.
fairly based on consumption.
Okay.
But also too, as a region, if we need to provide water to our neighboring municipalities, that's also a further consideration, whether or not that other municipality might have to build a plant, might have to do something different. So
Okay.
that's I
Good.
think, a bigger conversation
Okay,
as well.
somebody said it's complicated, to some of us anyway, and I'll look forward to the reports.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My gosh, this has been a huge report, and your responses have been really helpful too, Mr. Goodwin. I appreciate the depth of your knowledge. As Councillor Towndale said, we have often considered water meters, and we just stop when we hear the price tag. So I'm really glad you've broken down some of the specifics of the prices and even some possible approaches to lessening the blow. I was shocked to hear, to read rather, that the average per capita usage in Carmel is almost double what it is in municipalities our size and larger, of course, who have water meters. So, and from a conservation point of view, we could cut things in our water usage in half. Now, I found this part of the report really frustrating when you go in through the opportunity and the risks, because it just seems to me it's equivocating, like on one hand this, the other hand that. But obviously, if you going in the direction you're going, you feel the opportunities outweigh the risks. That's obvious. So I want to ask you, of all the other communities our size who have gone to meters, has anybody backtracked? Has any community abandoned a metering system?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I asked that question of our local MECP inspector, and she said no.
Well, that tells us something. Thank you.
Any further comments, discussion? Councillor Gardner.
Just a quick comment. I went through this page by page. I'm not going to pontificate. I'm looking forward to getting a report, a full report. There was a heck of a lot of work put into this, and much appreciated, believe me. And some of the information in here opened my eyes, so it's going to make the decision fairly easy once we see the report from the administration.
What struck me in the report, and I will say the same as my colleagues, it was a good report, well written, is that we are one of the few municipalities left our size with no meters. And it struck me too that the province has taken some notice of this when they perform the audit of our water situation. We get full A+ marks every time, and we're very proud of that. But there's always that little notation from the province authorities saying, but you're one of the only ones not doing this, and what's happening. So it does remind me of the whole wastewater treatment plant discussion that we had years ago, where we started to build up a reserve because we knew the province was going to be telling us, you need to upgrade your wastewater treatment plant. And so we started to prepare ahead of time. This reminds me of that. Feels like the province is going to start talking to us about this, so it feels like getting this plan in place makes sense now. I do want to say, though, that ahead of the meeting, there was a couple here that got tired and left because our meeting was too long, but they wanted to hear our water meter discussion. I hope they're watching at home. But their question was, okay, so you've surveyed us, we've answered you, and now are you putting in meters? Is this happening next week? What's happening? So clearly we have to, when we're surveying, and I appreciate the surveying, I think it's a good thing, but we also have to now step up our communication with the public to let them know exactly what it is we're doing. This is complicated, but we have to make it a little bit more accessible for the public in terms of what we're deciding to do and what the timeline is, because this couple sort of said, so what is our meters happening next week? What's the point of surveying if you don't respond back? So just highlighting that we have some challenges ahead. All in favor of the motion? Against? Carried. Madam Clerk.
Communications, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
And our first item is the follow-up to compensation for council.
So you will recall that we had a discussion around the councillor compensation some weeks ago, and you all had to vote to either increase or not increase your salaries. At that time, we did not discuss the mayor's salary, and so the legislation requires that we have a discussion around that. I chaired that last discussion around your compensation and voted along with you. I don't feel it's appropriate for me to chair this discussion concerning the mayor's salary. However, I do want to be at the table because if you vote for your salary, so should I. So that means that the acting mayor for this month will come up, take my spot, and I will take Councillor Bergeron's spot for the discussion concerning the mayor's salary.
It's your chance.
The chains?
No. Sorry, Councillor Bergeron.
I was expecting about 20 different notices of being out of order here, but that's okay. Madam Clerk?
So the recommendation is that council adopt an increase for the mayor's annual salary at the annual rate of inflation as defined by the Consumer Price Index by Statistics Canada, and proceed with the bylaw for adoption at the next regular council meeting.
Is there a motion on the floor? Councillor Grant?
I'll move the motion.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hollingsworth? We have a seconder. I will open debate then. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I'm going to be consistent with what I said when we talked about it for ourselves. I don't have a problem with the fact that the raise should happen here. My problem is that we're voting within our term. So if this was a motion to increase the salary to these levels starting the next term of council, I would vote for it 100%, because it's not, doesn't appear to be so self-serving. So I'm going to vote exactly the same way I voted for our own. I just think we should be, the raise I don't have a problem with. I just don't think we should be giving it to ourselves. So I'll vote consistently in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Councillor Grant, second? No?
No.
Oh, mistake. First mistake. I have Councillor McDonald next.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. And I support the motion. This isn't actually a discussion about a raise. This is simply a discussion of the annual adjustment to be in conformity with the cost of living raise that occurs in our society. So I fully support this motion. And it's not a raise. This is simply the consumer cost index.
Thank you. Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. In line with Councillor Bennett, consistency on this issue. We discussed our raises some time ago, and as you all remember, I abstained during that discussion. And part of it was for the same reasons. I didn't feel comfortable discussing it. And I mean, it's a little bit of a weird, awkward thing. I think it was yourself that said, what a privilege to be able to decide one's wage. I think it's a bit of a curse. I said that last time. So, I mean, I could go in the same arguments I made last time, and this isn't a swipe against our mayor, who I think is doing a great job, but this ties in the greater, like, the council compensation discussion. I think this is an extension of that discussion. So I can repeat my arguments from last time, but realistically, I'm going to be abstaining from this vote again, based on what I said at the last discussion, because to me, this is an extension of the same debate we already had. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor McIntosh next.
Does council not get the annual increase, cost of living or whatever it is, same as administration?
Madam CEO?
Is that built in already?
Through you, Mr.
Do we have to
Act-
vote on that every year?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, you have to decide on it once a term of council. So what has happened in the past is usually in the fourth year of a term, council makes that decision for the following 4 years. And that decision via bylaw has included cost of living increases. So that's done by bylaw during this type of review. So it's not automatic.
For 2020, we would have to bring
So-
a motion to, or you said in the fourth year.
So for 2020, what has happened with councils, council's already reviewed what their remuneration is going to be for the next 3 years, following this year. So that has been done, but without that, council would have to decide whether it's cost of living, whether it's a lump sum, whether it's nothing.
Okay, I have no problem with this, but I just want to discuss something Councillor Bennett brought up, that it's on, term. The last council in the fourth year said, let's put it off till the next year, and that's exactly what we did. Because there was a concern about making an election issue. That was discussed. And so we did discuss in the fourth year. We said the next term can take care of it. That's exactly what we did. So if we're going to kick it off for another 3 years, that would have been, 8 years we would have been kicking this can down the road. But with this one, I have no problem. It's, and you look very good in that job.
Oh. I hope someone took a photo, but that's about it. I have Councillor Hollingsworth next.
Thank you, Your Acting Worship. A couple of points. Wanted to get that in there.
Thank you.
A couple of things worth noting, and I think it was already articulated. Every time a council, and it doesn't matter the year, the time, or the place, talking about pay raises just prior to election means it's just not going to happen, because it's so charged that no matter how justified a council is in supporting a pay raise, they will generally avoid it because they look like the proverbial bad guys, if you would. And so even though I appreciate the logic, it just will not happen. The majority of council doesn't want to get tired, greedy politicians at the trough, and so they tend to put it off. The problem with putting it off is that if you put it off for this year and next year and 8 years and 12 years and 14 years, finally when a council decides to say, yes, the position of mayor needs a pay increase, they then start debating 10, 20% increases, which gets everybody really riled up, justifiably so. Arguably, certainly backing up just a tiny bit, when we talked about councillor remuneration, we were amongst the lowest paid group of councillors in the province, and even though we haven't, the raise we voted in favor of ourselves doesn't even get us to the average, people were still, you look at you guys looking for more money. The bottom line is this, Your Acting Worship. The truth of the matter is 2% is simply at approximate rate of inflation, which is what anybody in any profession would probably pursue if they could. The beauty of tying it to the rate of inflation is it takes the politicians essentially out of the equation and simply is, look, this is what the rate of inflation is, therefore this is what the raise is. It's clean, it's easy, it's predictable, it allows our administrators to budget accordingly, and that's something that, assuming this stays the course, 10 years from now, they can still make that budget on that base presupposition. Don't think it's wrong to get a raise from time to time or on an annual basis, and the rate of inflation, to me, is the most simplistic, cleanest way of doing it, so I'll support the motion.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Hebert?
Thank you. I just have a question. It says here that along with the increase, there will also be compensation for benefits, RSP, dental, LTD, life insurance, car allowance, etc. Has that always been the case for the mayor, or is this an addition?
Madam CEO?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, yes, that's always been the case.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Any other discussion? Madam Mayor?
Thank you for taking the chair, Mr. Acting. I feel like I should button my jacket as I stand in your spot.
It's a
It's a
thing.
thing. So it is not joyful to have to discuss your own salary. Councillor Towndale used the word awkward. Yeah, it's awkward. And in my time as a councillor, I don't think I ever supported an increase to my salary for the very reasons that Councillor Towndale abstains and Councillor Bennett says no. However, this last discussion that we had, you all voted for redressing your situation as councillors, and you stood by that and you made a decision, and I voted with you on that. Because we were, as Councillor Hollingsworth said, so out of whack with what else was going on in Ontario. So going to Councillor McDonald's comments, this is not an increase. You will notice that the salary for the mayor in Cornwall is not out of whack the way that your compensation was. So this is really about a cost of living increase, and so I will be transparent and support that, as you did when you discussed your own compensation, because the law requires us to do this awkward, joyless thing that we do in terms of dealing with our compensation once in a term. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before I call the vote? Then I'll call the vote for the motion on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. I believe it's carried. Any other motions before I leave with Councillor Gardner?
On the same vein, the council voted themselves an extra 30%, which is the money that we lost from taxes. We weren't being taxed. 30% of our income was not being taxed. The federal government decided that we were going to tax our income. So I want to propose a motion that the CAO come back with a report that would strengthen the mayor's budget in lieu of the loss of the 30% that she lost, as we did, and we voted ourselves that amount back. So I don't know how to put the motion forward, but I would like to have the CAO come back with a report on how we can strengthen the mayor's compensation, or whatever you decide to come back with.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Madam Clerk, could you clarify the exact motion?
I always take a few minutes, Mr. Acting Mayor, to think out my motions properly when I write them, but it is basically to request a report from the CAO outlining the 1/3 tax exemption to strengthen the mayor's compensation.
Councillor Gardner, does that...
To come back with a report of how we can strengthen the mayor's position.
Clear?
And that's in lieu of the loss that she had, same as we did. So,
Mr. Acting Mayor, may I ask what that means, position?
Oh, you may.
The mayor's
but
position?
she lost the 1/3,
Yes.
as we did. So rather than a raise, I would like the CAO to come back with a report on how we can deal with that 1/3 loss in terms of strengthening her budget for the mayor.
Thank you. Received. I'll give the clerk a few seconds to reiterate, to reread how you believe that motion to
Perhaps
be?
I'm just not understanding your intention. Is your intention to look at the salary, the 30% or the 1/3, and to look at
necessarily.
other areas where she can be
There
compensated?
are other areas that could be compensated that would be help to her in her
Could be a
job.
benefit in lieu of a raise?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Unclear on it.
Can you read the motion as Councillor Gardner is expressing it?
To request a report from the CAO, looking at the 1/3 tax exemption, to strengthen the mayor's position with options on how to compensate.
Yeah.
Something like that?
Thank you. I think you have a point of order, Councillor Hebert?
Maybe,
Or,
no.
no, then
Yes,
I'll
a
call for
point
a,
of-
I'll call for a seconder unless
Sure.
you have a point of order. I'll call for a
Okay, maybe-
seconder
maybe
then.
it's a point of order.
I'll call for a second. You have a point of order? All
Yeah,
right.
maybe just to
Throwing
help
me a wrench here.
just to help clarify the motion, I think what Councillor Gardner means is to potentially take that 1/3 that is now not in the mayor's salary and add it to her budget that she can use to do things with, not as a benefit, because it looks like, there's already benefits there for the mayor's position, but that 1/3 that is not being allocated to be potentially used in her work, in her budget. Is that what you mean, Councillor Gardner? Yeah, not as an added benefit.
So,
That makes sense.
I won't speak for the clerk, but it seems to me like a report would include that type of conversation. Am I incorrect? I don't see any difference between what Councillor Hebert says and what Councillor Gardner was anticipating. Is that correct?
I think yes.
Okay.
Mr.
So
Acting Mayor.
I'll call for a
Options
seconder to the original motion because I think it's pretty clear. Councillor Hebert, we have a seconder. So this is now on the floor. Is there any debate and/or discussion? Councillor McIntosh.
Is that defined, like we're going to increase the mayor's budget?
Nope.
Or are we going to look at that'd be one of the options? Is that what we're looking at?
Motion is for a report, but I'll have the
Oh,
clerk clarify.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, is to look at how the mayor can get the 1/3, whether by compensation, benefits, budget,
Increasing the
et cetera.
RSP or setting up a tax-free savings account or something like that, or budget? Yeah, okay. We're not narrowing it down to just budget. Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion? No? Okay. Oh, Councillor McDonald.
So just to follow up and clarify further, I use an example. Last summer, we had a community picnic, and it was going to be outside, so it was cost-free. But in the event of rain, I did approach the mayor and asked her if she would let her budget absorb the cost if we had to actually rent the salons at the Civic Complex. And the mayor agreed. So I'm thinking this is the sort of ability that Councillor Hebert was referring to, that the mayor would actually have a bigger budget with which to pay for these things that really don't belong to anybody, that benefit the whole community.
Yeah.
So,
So I'll refer that
So
to the
to increase
CAO. The report seems pretty straightforward in the motion, but I'll just make sure you're aware of this type of commentary.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. So we can come back with a report, but if there is a need for budget within council and the mayor for items that are not pertaining to compensation, those can be items that can be decided during a budget process, right? So I don't necessarily think the two, because it's not as though one's going to offset the other. I think the change that has occurred is that no longer will elected officials benefit from that 1/3 tax exemption, which is significant for some of our elected officials. So some decisions have been made to adjust compensation. We could look at other components of benefits, but to look at other areas within a budget, to me, that's an item that's separate from this topic. That would be an item that council can take a look at during budget deliberations. If you think that there should be additional funds within the mayor's budget or council as a whole for certain things that may arise during the year or certain events that council might want to have some participation in, that's a budget discussion. That would be my recommendation.
So
Thank you.
if I may comment, unless somebody else.
Before the comment, does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Gardner, I'll give you the floor.
Well, just, when we gave ourselves the 1/3, we didn't have to wait for a budget. We did it right away.
Right.
So,
So through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, we will come back with a report that's consistent with the one that we did for council.
okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of this motion? All those opposed? Carried. Thank you. Think we're good? You want your chair back? All yours.
Was the chair comfortable?
Thank you, Councilor Bergeron.
Yep.
Next item.
Madam Mayor, we're going to go back to consent item 3, third quarter financial results for 2019.
Connecting link.
I'm sorry?
Connecting link funding.
Oh. Ahead of myself. Connecting Links Program intake. The recommendation is that council approve the following. A, that council endorse the submission of an application to the 2020-2021 MTO Connecting Links Program. And B, that the project submitted for the funding program shall be the Brookdale Avenue North Road rehabilitation and widening from the north limits of the Canadian National Railway overpass to the south limits of the Highway 401 overpass.
Recommendation moved by Councillor Grant and Councillor Bennett. Discussion. Councillor Towndale, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I have a question, excuse me, in regards to the Brookdale overpass. I know it's not exactly this, but it is tied into this, and it did benefit from the Connecting Links program previously. Through you, is that overpass being expanded to 4 lanes?
Madam CAO, is that for Mr. DeWitt?
Yes.
Mr. DeWitt.
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, it is not. At this point in time. It's just 2 lanes.
Okay, through you, Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
You say at this time, are there plans in the future to do so?
There is not. There is some long-term talk, I'll say, of eventually widening, but I think we're waiting for much more, a higher vehicle, average daily vehicle count. So, but not at this time.
Okay. And sorry, Madam Mayor, one more follow-up
Go
question.
ahead.
So, based on that, so we're going to have 4 lanes past the bridge, toll gate onwards, and we're going to have 4 lanes prior to the bridge. Do you see bottlenecks happening as we, as traffic approaches the bridge, it has to merge into a single lane on either side, and then it goes back to 4 lanes, but won't that cause some sort of bottlenecking on either side?
Through you, Madam Mayor, my understanding is that it's not going to be 4 lanes beyond in the piece that we're talking about now. It's 2 lanes with widened and with the bicycle lanes.
Oh, okay, so I misunderstood then. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bennett?
That was my question, thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Questions? All in favor of the recommendation? Against? Carried.
Now consent item 3.
Now consent items.
Third quarter financial results for 2019, with a recommendation that council receive the third quarter financial results for the period ending September 30th, 2019.
So, moved by Councillor Bergeron, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Towndale, did you want to?
Through you, Madam Mayor, actually pulled out the item for my colleague, Councilor
Okay,
Bergeron.
Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you. I did have to leave for half an hour. I
That's
did
fine.
ask that it be pulled out of consent for 2 reasons. First of all, I think third quarter report should be kind of discussed, shouldn't just be passed in consent. That's a personal philosophy. What I would like is just a general update from our general manager, CFO, if we can, on projects that are seeing a relatively large variance, not the $500 ones, but the ones that maybe we should be taking note of were in Q3 of 2019. So just a general update, if I could, on these project variances.
Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Bergeron, are you talking about the variances in Schedule 1 or actually our capital report?
I'm speaking about both, but in general, the capital report, if you're going to speak to the ones that are maybe much higher than we thought, much lower than we thought, and just generally why?
First, maybe I'll talk about our operating budget. We did see variances in tax write-offs that we have discussed with council, and so we're running at an unfavorable or a deficit of about $572,000 there. Also, our supplementary taxation looks like it'll be under budget by about 120. We have some corporate variances, though, that are favorable that offset that, and all of this is on Schedule 1, page 131 of your agenda, including salaries and benefits. We have fuel that's coming in under budget, and then we have a mixture of a number of smaller items in our operating budget. Overall, we think that the corporation is running at budget. We have projected a variance right now, a surplus of just under $50,000. But when we move to our capital projects, and some of the managers here in the room may have to comment on them specifically, are we looking at the projected variance column? There's not a lot of information in there yet, as our projects are ongoing right now. We have committed some dollars to most of our projects, but we have unspent dollars as well, because oftentimes our capital projects are not done in 1 year, but over a period of a couple of years. So you'll see come to council in the last meeting of December a capital carry forward report that shows you those capital projects that we're planning on carrying forward to 2020 in order to complete. And then we'll take a fourth quarter to council and bring forward any capital savings to our year end. I'm not sure if you want me to get into specifics or if you have any capital projects you'd like to discuss.
I would love specifics, but my only other question really is about the building surplus reserve, which is far exceeding what I think we had expected. Maybe could you comment on that one?
Yes, that's part of our operating budget. In 2019, we've seen an increase in our permit revenue, and Mr. Borlow may want to comment on this as well. And right now, it's estimated at just over $890,000, I believe. And there is a regulation that permits received are to go against the cost of that business unit. So in a year that there's a surplus, we'll contribute that surplus to the buildings permit reserve. And in a year where we may run a deficit, we'll pull from that reserve to support the costs in a downturn.
Thank you. That answers the financial question. If I may, to Mr. Boileau, maybe comment on why that is so high and what we're seeing in terms of trends as this year progresses.
Mr. Boileau?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. The increase is largely with one major project, and that is the Shoppers Drug Mart expansion, which is a very substantial project. We talked earlier today about building height. It's a building that not only brings the Shoppers Distribution Center to be almost 1 million square feet, but it's actually 90 feet high, which is very unusual for a distribution center. So that permit alone, you can't really predict in a year what construction will occur, but certainly that one, in fact, represents almost 35–40% of the building permit values for the year. So that really makes a difference in a year.
Thank you. I mean, these are exactly the kind of answers I'm looking for in a Q3 update. This is why I would pull it from consent pretty much always moving forward. These are the types of information I don't think we get enough of that will help us at budget time when it comes back to making some big decisions. Thank you.
Any further comments? Councillor McDonald? Thank you. Just a question with regard to supplementary taxation point 2. The point is made that if there's an excess, it goes into the working reserves, but if the taxation is below budget, the variance is to the operating budget. So do you mean toward the end of the year we'd actually be cutting some of our programs some of the operations of our programs, or what?
Madam
Through you,
CFO?
Madam Mayor, we wouldn't be cutting any of our programs unless the city was trending a deficit that showed that we had to do something by the end of the year in order to stay on
Okay.
budget. But right now, we're trending on budget, even with this unfavorable variance in our supplementary taxation of $120,000.
Okay, but if, then we would be cutting. If-
Right, and
yeah.
if something like that occurred come third quarter, a report would be brought to council to let
Right.
them know that there is a variance to budget, and certain means would have to take place in order to remain on budget, and that would be a council decision on
Okay.
how we would proceed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Gardner and then Councillor McIntosh.
Just a quick question, thought about it tonight. The Progress Fund is bringing in an amount of money and interest to pay for the Benson Center. What's the difference between what we're paying out and the shortage from the interest from the...
Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor. There's two things happening with the Progress Fund right now. Our principal and interest payments are about $720,000 a year. The fund is earning probably $580,000 a year in interest, so we're short if we're looking to pay 100% of our debt charges. The other item that we have to consider is because the current market value of the Progress Fund is lower because of our bond fund, we're only taking in 80% of that interest earned. So we're not taking in $580,000 of revenue to go against that I think it's about $720,000 in cost. We're taking in 80% of that revenue based on a policy of council.
Are we ongoing looking at changing who we're investing with to possibly get a higher interest rate, or is that ongoing?
We've been working with the CAO and our auditor to move those funds at opportunity, when the opportunity presents itself.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
Under winter control, we're over budget, and that was before yesterday. Says estimated deficit of 93,000. Is that more definite now, Mr. DeWitt?
Through you, Matt. I mean, we're hoping for a big meltdown in the next couple of days.
Yeah, sure.
Without a flood.
Yeah.
And the winter control reserves at 600,000, obviously we're going to have to go into reserves. I think we're going to have to go into reserves. How do we build that back up? Climate change?
Madam CFO or Madam CAO?
The reason it's. Through you, Madam Mayor. We found with our winter control budget over the years, you will get some winters similar to our building permits reserve. You're going to get some winters where the activity is very high and some years where it's very low. So the idea is to have the reserve to be the buffer to smooth out so that we're not making budget decisions in the middle of February or March to
Yeah.
add or take money out of winter control.
I know in the bad old days, they used to take the money out and spend it.
Yeah.
Figured next year wouldn't be as bad, but we have a reserve now. That's good.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I just have one. We have a $48,000 surplus, right? On what amount of a budget?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the city has a budget of about $190 million operating in capital. These are our variances. It doesn't include capital right now because not all of our capital projects are known at this time if there will be a surplus or not, so this is operating. And so we're trending on budget, a variance of about $50,000.
Which is not much in terms of variance. Okay. Thank you. All in favor? Against? Carried. Thank you.
We have
Madam
one-
Clerk, yes.
We have one RFP, request for proposal 19P11, City of Cornwall Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review, with a recommendation that this RFP be awarded to WSP Canada Group Limited from Ottawa at the total bid price of $234,249.
Moved by Councillor Grant, seconded by Councillor McDonald. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried.
I have no new business items, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
Passing of bylaws. That bylaw 2019-134 and 2019-136 to 142 inclusive, listed on the agenda, are being presented to council for adoption.
Moved by Councillor Ibaz, seconded by Councillor Gardner. All in favor? Carried.
Reports from standing committee, Madam Mayor.
Are there any reports from standing committees? Councillor Gardner, Councillor McDonald, and then Councillor Towndale.
Just an update on the, on our university. Through the mayor, we sent out letters to Jim McDonnell, Minister of Tourism, Official Languages and Francophonie of Canada, Premier Doug Ford, Honorable Ross Romano, Minister of Training in Colleges and Universities, and Eric Duncan. These letters have been sent out through the mayor's office. I will ask the clerk to maybe put a copy of each one in your mailboxes so you understand what we've done up to this date. I just want to keep you folks updated. The other thing is I spent 2 days at Alpha in Toronto, which is actually a health unit issue. And we really had some good discussions on what's happening with the changes that Premier Ford, and they're coming around and starting to realize that they did make some mistakes. We're going to update, they are going to update public health modernization, as they call it. We spoke to Christine Elliott. We now have Allison Blair and Jim Pine, who will be the experts going around to the municipalities and the health units to get our input so that we have a say in what happens in the future. So,
Councillor Mack, did you want to respond to that directly? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
but the French University, Globe and Mail reported 2 weeks ago that Doug Ford bailed out on the French University, and Carolyn Mulroney has approached the federal government. They're going to build the university, and then the province has agreed to take it over. So it's now a federal
Right.
matter.
it was their initiative in the first place, the federal government.
So my understanding is the federal government will commit to the first 4 years of funding, and then we'll expect the province to follow up after that.
Yep.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'd just like to say that we've had many events, of course, at the Future Arts Center, but coming up the last 2 weekends in November, we'll actually be putting plays on. Vagabond Theatre has rented the space, and for the last 2 weekends, they will be performing their annual fall play. So 22nd, 23rd of November, and 29th and 30th.
Thank you. Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to provide a brief report from the Audit Committee.
Yes.
So the Audit Committee met on November 5th with a couple items on the agenda, one being the Municipal Works Yard development. And the auditors, in a discussion, this has to be formalized, and there will be a formal letter of engagement signed, I believe, on the 27th or 28th at our next meeting. But the auditors will be looking at that project. And we had an initial discussion about it at a very high level, but look forward to what that brings. Thank you.
So the audit committee consists of Councillor Towndale, Councillor Bergeron, and myself. Councillor Hollingsworth?
I'm good.
Oh, okay.
No more
Anybody?
standing committees for me.
Okay. Any other reports from standing committees? Okay. Notices of motion, Madam Clerk?
I have none, Madam Mayor.
Pending business listing.
The pending business listing of Tuesday, November 12th is being presented to council to receive.
Moved by Councillor Ibaz, seconded by Councillor Bennett. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Confirming bylaw?
That bylaw 2019-143, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the City of Cornwall at its meeting held this evening, is being presented to council for adoption.
Moved by Councillor McDonald, Councillor Towndale. All in favor? Carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Ibaz, Councillor Gardner, all in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Further and further down every day.
So the next time is...
Bloom.